A blind farmer is attacked by thieves, but what his horse did will surprise you. What happens when the most feared gang in the region encounters the most unlikely pair of friends from the Mexican mountains? In a world where darkness should have been his greatest weakness, Don Ezequiel turned the night into his most powerful ally. When thieves invaded his farm, they didn't know they were walking into a trap. Subscribe now and witness a story of courage that will make your heart race with every second. The sun had barely risen when Don Ezequiel was already on his feet, guided by the smell of damp earth and the song of birds. His eyes, covered by a whitish film, had not seen for 15 years, but his other senses had become extraordinarily sharp. "It will rain before noon," he announced, crouching to pick up a handful of soil. "The earth is anxious for water." Sophia, his 25-year-old daughter, smiled at seeing her father so connected with nature. "Good morning, my daughter. Have you made the coffee?" asked Don Ezequiel, turning toward her before she had even announced her presence. "As always, Dad. Mathieu already went to check the cattle in the north pasture. That boy has a restless spirit. He should have waited for coffee, as tradition dictates. He said he saw something strange last night and wanted to check it in the daylight." Don Ezequiel's expression shifted subtly. The silence was broken by the sound of an approaching engine. "It's Captain Ramirez's jeep," he said with absolute certainty. "And he's not alone. I hear hooves." Sophia confirmed, surprised by her father's precision. A military jeep advanced up the road, and behind it came a huge black horse whose coat seemed to absorb the morning light. Captain Ramirez, a tall man with broad shoulders, greeted Don Ezequiel enthusiastically. "I've brought something special for you, old friend." As they approached the animal, Don Ezequiel felt the heat radiating from its strong body. "This is Relâmpago," introduced Ramirez. "He was my companion in the tactical cavalry for years. He was trained to detect threats, guide his rider through dangerous situations, and be more than transport, a true partner. Relâmpago can be your eyes in the field, Don Ezequiel. He understands commands, recognizes danger, and protects his owner with his life." The horse neighed softly, as if he understood they were talking about him. "Looks like he's already chosen you." Ramirez smiled. Don Ezequiel stroked the horse's strong neck, feeling an immediate connection. "Let's see if this caballero can keep up with an old farmer," he replied with a smile. During the day, Ramirez explained the animal's extraordinary abilities. "On the border, he saved my life 3 times. He senses changes in the environment no human could detect." Around 2 in the morning, a sharp whinny pierced the silence of the farm. In the stable, Relâmpago was restless, stamping his hooves on the ground. Sophia and Mathieu went to check and found the horse with his ears pointed toward the western fence, as if he could see through walls. "He's looking at something," whispered Sophia. Mathieu followed the horse's gaze and discovered footprints near the fence, fresh and clear in the soft soil. "They're not from any of our workers," he said, examining the tracks. "Who would come here in the middle of the night?" "Someone who doesn't want to be seen," answered Mathieu. "Let's alert the captain." The next morning, the aroma of coffee and tortillas filled the kitchen when Mathieu rushed in, his face flushed with worry. "They cut our fence on the west side," he announced, throwing a piece of wire on the table. "It wasn't an accident. The cut is clean, done with pliers made for fences. I found tracks from at least 3 different people." Don Ezequiel placed his cup on the saucer with a controlled movement. The tension in his jaw was visible, though his expression remained calm. "Did they take any animals?" "I haven't done a full count yet. They're mapping the farm. Studying our routine." "It's not the first time I've heard of this," Ramirez commented. "From Chihuahua to Sonora, there's a pattern. They watch for days, sometimes weeks before attacking. When they strike, they know exactly where the valuable cattle are." Sophia admitted she had been finding strange footprints near the barn for weeks. The threat was becoming clear. "Now we're sure we're being watched," concluded Don Ezequiel, standing up. "And that's why we won't sit and wait. We'll show these thieves they picked the wrong farm." Soon, the blind farmer was riding Relâmpago naturally, as if they had been partners for years. On a neighboring farm, Don Esteban Figueroa, a stocky 60-year-old man, embraced his old friend. "It's about time you showed up. I've lost 6 purebred cattle in 3 nights, he reported. The police came, took notes, promised to investigate. Nothing. Their workers had also been injured during confrontations. They say it's at least 5 men, explained Don Esteban, led by someone called El Coyote, a former soldier who knows all the rural surveillance tactics. To demonstrate Relâmpago's skills, Ramirez proposed a test. Sofia and Mateo would hide, and the horse, guided only by Don Ezequiel, would have to find them. "How's my dad supposed to guide a horse if he can't see where we are?" protested Mateo. "That's exactly the point," replied Ramirez. "Don Ezequiel doesn't need to see. Relâmpago will be his eyes." Don Ezequiel mounted the horse and whispered, "Search," in his ear. Relâmpago reared slightly and began to move with purpose, avoiding invisible obstacles. He found Mateo hiding in a barrel, tapping his hoof 3 times to indicate his presence. Then he located Sofia in the branches of a tree, neighing precisely at the branch where she was hiding. "Just as you said," concluded Don Ezequiel, amazed. "He's much more than a horse." The group established a mutual defense system between the farms using radios and visual signals. Upon returning to Los Olivos, Don Ezequiel pulled an old revolver from a carved box, checking the cylinder with experienced fingers. "Dad, what are you doing?" asked Sofia, alarmed. "Preparing for what's coming. 15 years ago, when I lost my sight, I swore I'd never be a burden to you. I've learned to live in this darkness, to feel the world in other ways. This land is our legacy, and I am still the guardian of this place, with or without my eyes." At night, the farm dogs were restless, unable to determine where the threat was coming from. Mateo found fresh footprints near the northern corral, following a methodical reconnaissance pattern. In the stable, Sofia discovered a piece of fabric stuck to the fence with a strong, almost nauseating smell. "Juniper oil mixed with coyote urine," identified Ramirez after smelling it. "A trick used to disorient guard dogs. The scent is so strong, they lose the ability to track anything else." "They know what they're doing," concluded Don Ezequiel. "That's why Relâmpago is vital. He was trained to overcome these techniques. While the dogs are confused by smells, he uses all his senses together." With determination, Don Ezequiel mounted the horse. "Show me, my friend," he whispered. "Be my eyes." Relâmpago led them to the western fence, where it had been cut. There, a crack in the dense vegetation revealed they were not alone. Sofia felt a chill run down her spine when a low whistle emerged from the darkness, answered by another from the opposite direction. "They're assessing our defenses," whispered Ramirez, "checking how many we are and how we react." "Let them think we're just a blind old man and his family undefended," replied Don Ezequiel. "We've set our own trap. They don't know they can be seen by eyes that do not see." The next day, Don Esteban and Don Hernan also brought Don Jacinto Guerrero, a retired army tracker with more than 40 years of experience. The white-haired elder examined the map of attacked farms. "Back in the 80s, a gang used similar tactics on the Arizona border," he commented, his voice as rough as stone scraping metal. "They'd study each farm for weeks, knew the habits of the owners, where they slept, even which dogs barked the loudest. These men are calculated and patient. They study their victims like predators studying prey, identifying weaknesses, habits, and moments of vulnerability." "How do we defend ourselves?" asked Don Ezequiel. "By changing what they expect to find. If they think you're meek, show strength. If they expect the animals to be in one spot, move them. If they believe you're vulnerable because of your blindness, use it to your advantage." During the discussion, Relâmpago began pawing at the ground insistently, neighing softly. Mateo discovered a small cylindrical object buried in the dirt. "Long-range microphone," identified Ramirez, turning pale. "Military grade. Can pick up conversations from up to 50 meters away. They've been listening to us." A sweep revealed 3 additional microphones strategically placed around the property, near the main house, in Relâmpago's stable, and in the prize cattle corral. "If they've already planted listening devices," warned Don Jacinto, "they're in the final stage of planning." "How did they get so close without being noticed?" asked Sophia, shaken. "They are trained to move," Ram answered, "and with those cloths soaked to confuse the dogs." "Relâmpago detected them," Marteau recalled. "That's why he was restless." Don Ezequiel smiled serenely. "They expect to find a defenseless, blind old man. Let's show them just how wrong they are." The dark, moonless night covered the Los Olivos farm like a black velvet cloak. Don Ezequiel sat on the porch, sensing every shift in the air. The increasing humidity, the scent of the earth awaiting rain, the unsettling silence of crickets that had stopped singing. "It's too quiet," Sophia commented. "Not even the crickets are singing." "They sense it," Don Ezequiel replied. "Animals always know when something's wrong." Relâmpago let out a sharp warning neigh from the stable. Don Ezequiel rose immediately. "He senses something." Mounted on Relâmpago, Don Ezequiel patrolled the property when the horse led him to a spot where he found cold ashes, a piece of twine, and empty food wrappers, a temporary observation camp with a perfect view of the barn and the corral. From the top of the barn, using night vision binoculars, Marteau spotted 2 shadows approaching stealthily. They weren't animals. They moved crouched and with unmistakably human intent, carrying what looked like weapons. Stones were thrown at different points of the property, the intruders testing defenses, checking to see if anyone would react. Ramirez confirmed movement on the eastern side as well, near the North Corral. Don Ezequiel returned to the house just as the radio signaled an alert. "They're divided," he concluded, dismounting swiftly. "They plan to surround the animals from 2 sides. He transmitted the agreed-upon code for neighbors to initiate the defense plan. While positioning himself strategically between the 2 barns, the horse became an extension of his lost senses. Through Relâmpago, Don Ezequiel could feel the presence of the intruders with extraordinary precision. The light creak of leather against metal, controlled breaths, boots sliding over dry soil. 4 men, he whispered into the transmitter. 2 at the main barn, 2 circling toward the North Corral, all armed. The invaders approached the main barn with military precision, maintaining perfect distance and covering complementary angles. They forced entry with a metal bar that barely made a sound opening the lock. What they didn't know was that the valuable animals had been hidden, leaving only decoys in their place. The trap was set. Sophia detected a vehicle approaching on the secondary road, a pickup truck with headlights. Off, perfect for transporting stolen cattle. Don Esteban radioed back, "We're in position, awaiting signal." The darkness, which should have been an ally to the invaders, became their greatest disadvantage. They were facing a man for whom the night was a familiar realm, guided by an animal trained to turn darkness into tactical advantage. The silence of dawn shattered as 3 men entered the corral, moving like shadows among the animals. Their faces were covered by bandanas. The leader, with a visible scar on his right temple, directed the others with precise gestures. "Quick and quiet," he whispered in a rough northern accent. "Start with the horses, the purebreds." One of them, thin and agile like a feline, threw a lasso, capturing a medium-sized chestnut with impeccable technique. "This is just a regular horse," he muttered, disappointed. "Where are the purebreds we saw last week?" "Keep looking," the leader ordered, constantly scanning the surroundings. "They must be at the back." The third invader, slow-bodied with shovel-like hands, was leading the chestnut out when a different sound pierced the air, a powerful neigh full of challenge. "What was that?" he whispered, instinctively reaching for his weapon. A dark and imposing shape emerged from the shadows, Relâmpago galloping toward them at impressive speed, eyes reflecting the faint light like glowing embers. "Careful!" the leader shouted, abandoning stealth. With the precision of a trained soldier, Relâmpago charged the man holding the lasso. The impact was calculated, strong enough to knock him down, but controlled to avoid Serious injury. The man fell with a muffled scream, air expelled from his lungs. "Damn it, shoot that animal," the leader ordered, drawing his weapon. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," said Don Ezequiel, emerging from the shadows mounted on a strong palomino. The old farmer held a rifle aimed precisely at the leader's voice, despite his blind eyes. "But how can you—" stammered the scarred man, his weapon trembling. "A man doesn't need eyes to see thieves," Don Ezequiel answered, his serene face contrasting with the tension of the moment, "especially when they're so predictable." A powerful lamp suddenly lit up the corral, temporarily blinding the invaders. Matteau appeared at the entrance, holding a shotgun. Workers blocked the other exit while vehicles approached, neighbors arriving as reinforcements. "You're surrounded," declared Don Ezequiel. "Drop your weapons." The slow-bodied man obeyed immediately. The one knocked down by Relâmpago was still trying to catch his breath, but the leader seemed to be calculating his chances. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he threatened, still pointing his gun. "El Coyote, I presume," said Don Ezequiel calmly. "Or should I say Lieutenant Miguel Salazar, dishonorably discharged from the army 5 years ago for selling weapons to cartels?" The man visibly paled. "How do you know that?" "The world is small for men of your reputation," Ram intervened from the shadows, "especially when old colleagues are watching." In a desperate move, El Coyote fired into the air and ran toward a gap in the perimeter, an opening between two newly arrived vehicles. For a moment it seemed he might escape. That's when Relâmpago acted again. As if anticipating the move, he cut off the fugitive's path with astonishing speed. Using a clearly trained technique, he turned sideways and with a precise spin of his body, struck El Coyote's legs with his hindquarters, dropping him like a rag. "Dull. Incredible," murmured Don Esteban. "I've never seen a horse do that." Relâmpago stood vigil by the fallen man, ears alert, eyes fixed on the intruder like a flawless guard. The remaining members of the gang, seeing their leader captured and the full encirclement, surrendered without resistance. Armed and determined workers from the 3 farms tied up the invaders, while Don Hernan called the state police. "How did you know?" asked El Coyote, frustrated. "We planned everything, studied every detail." "You made the mistake many make," Don Ezequiel replied, stepping up to the man. "You saw a blind farmer and thought he'd be easy prey. You didn't realize that in the dark we are all equal." The sheriff arrived with his patrol cars, looking genuinely surprised to see the situation already resolved. "Looks like we're just here for the paperwork," he commented. "We had special help," replied Don Ezequiel, pointing to Relâmpago. "He was my eyes tonight." At dawn, with the criminals taken by the police, neighbors and friends gathered to celebrate. Don Esteban proposed a toast. "To the unity that makes us strong, the courage that makes us endure, and to an extraordinary horse who proved that sometimes we need to borrow someone else's eyes to see what really matters. And to the man who never let his blindness define him," added Ramirez, "who taught us that true vision comes from the heart." Don Ezequiel, moved, shared. "Do you know what they told me when I lost my sight? That I'd have to sell the farm, that a blind man couldn't run a place like this. But I learned that true limits aren't in the eyes. But here," he touched his temple, "and here," he touched his heart. "And when we have friends, family, and even extraordinary animals who complete what we lack, there's no obstacle we can't overcome." In the stable, Relâmpago rested peacefully, his job done to perfection. The military-trained horse had found a new purpose, to be the eyes of a man who saw with his heart on a farm that from that night on would be known throughout the region as the refuge of the brave.